Towards 9 o'clock in the morning, she would ring her bell, at which we would enter her room and begin the lace making. I worked beside Luisa, and we used the same bobbins, the same thread, and the same pins, and I would correct Luisa's work because her stitches were somewhat loose, since she had not the strength to pull the threads tight because of the pain in her hands due to the stigmata she had received. At this point, I interrupted her and said, "But I never saw the stigmata on her hands." She answered me, "Of course not, because they were internal, and only I and a few other people saw them. Among these were her confessors and the Simodomo sisters, and I think her niece Giuseppina too. In fact, if one took Luisa's hand and held it up to the light, the internal hole was visible. When I entered her room during the night, I would frequently find her covered in blood. So much blood was seeping from her feet, her hands, and her side, that her nightdress and the bed were soaked in it. Sometimes the blood was even dripping onto the floor. Not only her body, but her head and face were also covered in blood. She seemed crucified. The first time I was deeply shocked, believing her to be dead through loss of blood, and I ran to fetch cloths to clean her. But when I returned, I found her absolutely clean, except for the sheet. It had all disappeared. This phenomenon would occur 2 or 3 times a year. "But you," I said to her, "you never told anyone about this phenomenon?" "No," she replied. "Only Father Benedetto Calvi knew of it. He absolutely forbade me to speak of it, and said that he would deny me absolution if I were ever foolish enough to tell anyone about it. You are the only one to know, and I hope that Luisa will not take it badly." After a pause, she continued, "I beg you not to tell of this phenomenon." She gave me the impression that she regretted having told me of it. Indeed, it was the first time that she had ever mentioned it. This is one of the many phenomena concerning Luisa's life that had continued to be unknown. My aunt, after a long pause, went on. Luisa usually worked only for churches. She would make pieces of lace for altar cloths, vestments, and cassocks for priests. Sometimes when they pestered her, she would make lace bedspreads for young couples. Luisa had a special soft spot for the sanctification of families, and many young husbands and wives would go to her for advice. How much good she did, and how many families did she save from ruin. I would leave the house when Luisa withdrew into prayer, and when I returned, shortly afterward, she would ring her bell, so I was not at all worried. Whenever I had to go away for a few days, her niece Giuseppina would replace me. But sometimes when I was somewhere else, at home, in church, or at some friend's house, I would hear her bell. I would interrupt anything, even lunch, and hurry to Luisa's house. Because of my way of doing things, I was considered odd, not only by the family, but also by strangers. I could give no explanations, because I alone could hear the sound of her bell, and if I had told others, they would have taken me for a mental case and a visionary. So I was silent, and when pressed to give a reason for this attitude, I always tried to change the subject, pretending not to hear. All this caused me immense suffering. Often, after a great rush to her, I would find Luisa still praying. I asked her, "And who was ringing the bell?" "I don't know," she replied. "And what did Luisa say?" "Nothing." "And what did you do?" I knelt down beside her bed and prayed. "But didn't you notice anything while Luisa was praying? Is what has been said of Luisa true, that she was often suspended in the air?" "I cannot speak of these things. Luisa always forbade me to speak of them. Her confessor was the only one to know everything, and he was the repository of her extraordinary phenomena. Luisa, for her part, always pretended that nothing had happened, nor did she allow a single word to be said of it. It all had to be submitted to the authority of the priest, and he alone could decide whether the phenomena were to be divulged. Luisa did nothing and wrote nothing without the authorization of her confessor. She was so submissive to the Church's authority that nothing was to be known or written and divulged without his permission. It is on these lines that it will be possible to know all about Luisa. It is all recorded in her writings. I added, "But her writings can't reveal everything about Luisa's life, because it was far more complex." "That's true," she answered. "I could tell many things that no one knows." "So why do you insistently refuse to speak?" "If Luisa had wished them to be known, she would have written them down, or the Church would have ordered her to write them. It is clear that certain phenomena which occurred, which I and others witnessed, do not serve for the sanctification of souls. The Lord permitted to be known all that is of use to the Church and to souls. The rest serves no purpose. In speaking of these things, I feel as if I were profaning the intimacy that was built up between God and Luisa. Human beings would not understand. The message bequeathed by Luisa exceeds her very person. Luisa wanted the Lord alone to have all the honor and glory, and she was to disappear into nothingness. This is why she loved solitude and silence, and showed great distress when she noticed that she was the object of people's veneration. For she considered herself only a poor, sick person in need of everything. I and others knew very well that Luisa had no need of anything, and that we had to be the custodians of her mystery. How often in the morning did I find Luisa all tidy, and the altar already prepared for Holy Mass, with the candles lit. And how did this happen, if Luisa never set foot out of bed for about 60 years? Are you sure of what you say? Absolutely certain. Because I was the only one who entered her room. Did you never wonder what the explanation was? I thought that angels served her, especially her guardian angel, to whom she was deeply devoted. Her room was often found full of fragrance. And did others smell this fragrance? Yes, those who took part in Holy Mass. I remember that once Father Cataldo de Benedictus, who had come to celebrate Holy Mass in absence of her confessor, said to me, "Don't scent the room, or I will come out with a headache." I assured him that no one had put scent in the room, but he did not believe me. Is it true that Luisa vomited everything she ate? Yes. However, this phenomenon was common knowledge, because Luisa was to live on God's will alone. But many did not believe it and thought that she must be eating something. I saw this too, several times, when I came to visit you in Luisa's house. So then, what else do you want to know? A lot of food was wasted, and at the time, as you know, poverty was widespread. I also pointed this out to Luisa, even if her food was so scant that it would have hardly sufficed to keep a newborn baby alive. Her answer was, "Let us obey." In fact, her confessors were adamant, harsh, and inflexible about this phenomenon. It seemed to me that there was a precise order from the bishop. Once the confessor told me very firmly, "She must eat every day, and everyone must know that she eats, or they will set the police at her door, as they did with Teresa Newman, with all the publicity of the newspapers." But did she drink water or other liquids? I never gave her water to drink. She drank nothing but the juice of bitter almonds, which the Simidomo sisters would bring her. Sometimes your sister Isa also prepared this juice, which she extracted from Aunt Nunzia's almonds. But don't bitter almonds contain a poisonous substance? And in the long term, don't they harm the organism? That I can't say, but I can assert with a clear conscience that it was the only liquid she drank without vomiting. Was it at least sweetened? No, she replied. Now that's enough. I have said almost all that I could say, which moreover was common knowledge. But I would like to know more. No, that is merely curiosity. If Luisa so wishes, I will be able to tell you a great many other things, and then it will be I who call you. So ended my conversation with Aunt Rosaria. It was October 15th, 1970. A perfect lace maker. Despite the mutilation of her fingers on one hand, Aunt Rosaria became a perfect lace maker, to the wonder of all. She perfected Luisa's work and taught all the girls who took the lace-making and embroidery course. In addition, she made herself indispensable, and in fact, after the death of Luisa's parents, became her housekeeper. It was she who received the commissions and finalized the work contracts. However, she told no one which pieces of lace had been made by Luisa, because the servant of God did not want her own work to be the object of special attention or admiration. After Luisa's death, the embroidery work did not cease, for Aunt Rosaria kept alive the tradition of lace-making and embroidery, which Luisa had caused to flourish. That Aunt Rosaria was a perfect lace-maker was considered by all as a never-ending miracle, since her physical handicap was such as to prevent her from doing this kind of delicate craft. For work that could have earned millions, since it required years to complete, extremely modest sums were requested. This is why we nephews and nieces complained to our aunt, at which she used to reply, "Money does not matter much. What is important is to be able to live." Aunt Rosaria told us that Luisa had categorically forbidden her to accept money for any reason, especially donations. If, by chance, sums of money arrived in letters, these letters were immediately returned to the sender. Luisa would say that what she possessed was too much for her, and that she had no need of anything. The small sums which they earned from their work were sufficient to support Aunt Rosaria and Luisa's sister, Angelina. The way the servant of God answered Saint Annibale when he tried to give her the royalties for the works she had published is typical. "I have no right," she said, refusing the money the blessed had offered her, "because what was written is not mine."